Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast. Erik Skopil on the show. I'm Matt Prehm. Welcome to another edition. We're going to dive into some recruiting news real quick, hot and heavy. Oregon last week, about a week ago now, started having official, or I should say unofficial visitors on campus for their junior day event. Eric and I and our photographer, we were at Autzen watching them walk up into the facility. We're able to identify a lot of the guys who made it. There were a couple guys who did not. And then all this week, starting Sunday, we've been speaking with players that were in Eugene for the unofficial visits. We've got a bunch of stories up on duckterritory.com. I highly encourage you guys to go and look at that. There were a couple. We'll start here. Maybe this is it's not necessarily bad news, but just unfortunate news. Guys that didn't make it. 5-star linebacker Tyler Atkinson was sick, and so he did not arrive. But we should note, Dan Lanning and company were in Georgia this week, a couple days ago. They were very quick to get back there to see him. Anthony Jones, another 5-star composite guy, he was also not here. Tredarian Ball, a verbal commitment for Oregon from Texas. He was just out at Hawaii a couple weeks ago for the Poly Bowl. Did not. He said he was hoping to make it, would try and make it. He didn't show up. It sounds like there's no real concern there. Israel Briggs did not make it as well, 4-star tight end. Darius Gray, a 4-star offensive lineman, did not make it as well. And then Duvet Williams, a 2027 4-star cornerback, did not make it. But nonetheless, the star power was through the roof. Chris Henry Jr., 5-star receiver. Brandon Arrington, a 5-star athlete. Kendra Harrison, 5-star tight end. Talanoa Ely, a 4-star top 30 prospect who was here. You look down the list in 2027, and Richard Wesley, a 5-star number 2 player in the country, was here. The list, Eric, in of itself, even with the guys that didn't show up, pretty impressive. And I think we should probably tell fans, the guys that are here are probably of heavy importance for Oregon this early in the process.
Yeah, this is a priority weekend. The names you just read off, and there are more of them, obviously. There were, I think, what was the final count? Just over 24, 28 or something?
Yeah, I think it was just under 30.
Yeah, I think I had 28, 29. These are mostly names that you're going to be hearing about in future podcasts, reading about on websites throughout the duration of the recruitments. These are 2026, 2027, and just a couple of 2028s, a couple quarterback recruits, I think, were here for 28 that they were involved. Actually, they made an offer to Aiden Edwards, who was a 2028 quarterback, while he was on visit. But yeah, these are just names that you're going to want to know. And we're going to run through some of them here. This class is obviously taking shape already. Number 1 ranked class in the country, 10 committed players. What, about half of them or so were up here for this weekend? And I think when you just look at it, you go, I was asked a couple of days ago, does it feel sustainable that this cycle finishes better than the 2025 class, which, as we all know, big time class, number 5 class in the country. I had a story up on the site, only class in school history for Oregon with all blue chip recruits. Only the second time that's happened in the 24/7 sports era, which is really impressive that they just don't sign any 3-stars, all 4 and 5. But is it possible that the 26 class can surpass that? And I think early returns are in on plenty of big names that this could be a class that, I'm not guaranteeing it by any means, but it wouldn't shock me at all if they are competing for the number 1 ranking when this kind of is all said and done, just with where they already are right now in that spot. And then just the incredible cast of talent that was there for Oregon's junior day, and guys even that you ran through that weren't there that we think Oregon will continue to be aggressive on. They'll have another junior day coming up in, I think, a couple months. They'll have official visits sometime, starting in June. June's kind of become the big official visit month. So I think the next 5 months of this is going to be really fun to follow. And I wouldn't be surprised if we go into the 2025 regular season with Oregon right where they are right now, or at least in the top couple of spots, just based upon where they are going.
I'm curious, you and I have spoken to a lot of the guys that were here. You can go read the interviews on duckterritory.com. We'll speak on some of it. the guys that I spoke to, overarching theme seemed to be about opportunity to meet the staff and really meet them from a personal level, not necessarily like, hey, come here and get developed. This is what we do, X, Y, and Z from a scheme standpoint. It was more personable, more like intimate of we want to get to know you. We want you to get to know us of who we are, what our coaching styles are, how we, how we're going to, from a parent perspective, how we're going to take care of your son when you are here at Oregon. And then another one that I think is it's today's day and age of college athletics. A lot of players told me the NIL info that they were able to gather and just how that intertwines into college athletics. Not necessarily money and dollar amounts.
Sure.
That wasn't necessarily what it was about, but was how Oregon will implement an NIL program for these athletes. Those were all like hot topics with these players. But the overarching one was if you were a committed guy coming in and seeing, like Cody Green talked a bunch about playing and hanging out with his future teammates. And then a lot of the other guys that are uncommitted, it was really getting a good feel for who these guys were. And I think in today's day and age of college football at Oregon, like their staff is big enough now where they had basically someone attached to every player. Like there was always one, and maybe there was a couple overlaps where a coach or a GA or a recruiting analyst had maybe 2 or 3 guys, but it wasn't very often. It really felt like it was heavily targeted where each recruit had basically someone on campus with them the whole time.
Yeah, that was one of the things that certainly kind of came up over and over was just, what was the highlight of your trip? Oh, it was the fact that I got to spend time with Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy, or Dan Lanning and Will Stein, or Dan Lanning and my position coach. I mean, Dan's name came up with everybody, which I think speaks to, again, his involvement in these junior day weekends. A couple of things that were said in terms of like what they were doing activity wise were like Kendra Harrison said he learned how to fish, which I don't know if that was everybody going out to the lake and in Caston or not, but that was interesting. And then I don't know, did you see anybody else talk about what Jax Tanner was talking about with the uniform design competition that he did with his family and the other recruits?
No, I did not see that. I did not have anyone else bring that up.
Okay, because I thought that was like, gosh, I wish we could ask more follow-ups on that, because that sounded just like interesting. Like he said, this is just a quote from his visit that Matt got. It was fun to work with the other O-line recruits to design a uniform and try to beat the skill guys. It's like, that sounds like just like a fun way to incorporate a day and kind of build into what Oregon's known for, which is competition, but also uniforms and kind of looking a certain way. So yeah, I mean, you can just tell that these things are meant to be fun, and they do a lot of fun. I mean, we were watching guys, walk in and they were getting ready to go up to the Autzen club level for some sort of get together with the group. And I think the other thing that stood out, it was we mentioned time with the coaches. Like, how many of Oregon's current players do you think we saw roll in there, Matt? Like couple dozen, like a lot.
There were a lot.
Like, and big, and like key guys, like Mateo was there showing guys around, and some of the running backs and some of the skill guys.
Multiple quarterbacks walk in.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, this is just an all hands on deck thing. I think it was cool just to kind of get a glimpse of kind of what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. And I know, Matt, no commitments quite yet coming out of this, but gosh, everybody you talk to, it just feels like Oregon really helped themselves in terms of moving up lists, kind of solidifying where they're at in these recruitments.
Yeah, like I don't know if there was necessarily the expectation someone would commit. It was certainly possible. I think Jax Tanner is a guy that you probably are sitting here thinking there's a good chance that he pulls the trigger for Oregon. He's a 3-star interior offensive lineman from Idaho, really huge dude, and he's probably going to play guard, maybe center at the next level. But that's one where you kind of look at it like he's been here a couple times now. I think he's going to come back out in the spring for an unofficial visit, and then it wouldn't surprise me if he uses that June window to take his official visit to Oregon. And if he's committed by then, it could be possible. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's not committed by June, that he pulls the trigger then. I think Oregon's the front runner here. And Oregon's in a position too with Jax Tanner that they can probably slow play, maybe isn't the right word, but be really picky about if they want to take him along, his commitment and win. Because they're in with a lot of other guys and they kind of know probably like if we want to push real hard, we can get this guy. I think another guy to watch is Nehemiah Telnoa. Telnoa, yeah. From De La Salle High School. He's high school teammates with Matthew Johnson. He's a 2026 guy. Matthew Johnson has enrolled at Oregon. We saw him roll into the evening function at Autzen. So, and this is a guy that, just like Jax Tanner, things are trending in the right direction. Tanner doesn't have a crystal ball yet. I'm pretty close to putting one in. But Telnoa does, from Brandon Huffman of 24/7 Sports. And it wouldn't surprise me, too, if this is typically you see commitments, a string of commitments in like junior year, which we've seen with Oregon with 10. Mm-hmm. And then you probably see a couple like late winter, early spring, and then right around the spring game, you might see a handful. And then right around June, you'll probably see most of the class fill the rest in. I think both these guys are going to be in that spring game to June area where a commitment sometime in that range feels highly likely.
I think another name, and I'm not going to say he's as close to them as committing, but another name that it feels like Oregon's in a good spot with is linebacker Talanoa Ely.
Yeah.
Who was up here and was kind of one of the priority guys coming in. I know you spoke with him. I know I think Tom Loy spoke with him. We got a couple different updates, and both of them, it was just glowing reports. And I know one of the things we're going to talk about on the show is just kind of like where are the priorities for this class? And to me, I don't know if he's your number one priority in this class because there's certainly a little better. Like there are, that sounds crazy to say better players because he's like he's going to be a 5-star, but there are players who are higher up the list maybe in terms of the overall rankings, but in terms of getting the best player at a position that I think is really imperative to hit hard this cycle, which is linebacker. Like this is the best option, and I think by quite a while for Oregon at this position group. And for them to be where they're at and to possibly get a commitment, I think is really significant. And that's not to say there aren't other good linebackers at this cycle, but out West, this is, I think, pretty clearly the alpha. And you talk to some of the Nashville guys, like this is a guy they think is not just a really good linebacker recruit this cycle, but maybe one of the better ones they've seen out West the last couple.
Yeah, I would agree. Like Oregon's in a good spot there, but he's also, and that segues into the importance part. Like they need this guy. He's the top linebacker prospect out West by a large margin. Yep. He's 31st in the updated rankings, the third best linebacker nationally at the position. The next closest guy in the region is Samu Mawala that Oregon has offered. Mawala is committed to Texas A&M. He's from California, and he's the 14th best linebacker. So, like from just a logistical standpoint, they have Tristan Phillips, who's the 13th linebacker committed. 13th best linebacker committed. He's a pure linebacker as well. He's a top 250 prospect. He's a dude, but I don't know if we would look at Phillips and say he's a guy that's probably going to play day one. I look at Talanoa Ely and say he's a guy that has the opportunity next season, or I guess in 2026, to have some kind of role, whether it's special teams or whether it's as a backup linebacker. There's probably that opportunity that's better and more likely than Tristan Phillips. And that's not to say Phillips is a good player, but there's a difference between a 200 guy and a top 40 guy. And that, so you're right. Like Ely is high importance for Oregon at the linebacker position. And honestly, Eric, like, wouldn't kind of be surprised if they take a couple extra guys here. One of them that was here that we weren't expecting was Kenneth Goodwin, a 3-star linebacker from Narbonne High School in Harbor City, California, the SoCal area. This is a dude that looked every bit the part of a college linebacker. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. It recently offered Bo Jandaru from Arizona, another 3-star linebacker. So that tells me that they probably want more than 1 or 2 players at this position. After only really signing 2.
Kind of one. I think Gavin
One,
Nix is the only true. And I know
yeah,
Nasir Wyatt's listed there, but when we watched Rose Bowl practice, he was outside linebacker.
correct.
So.
Yeah, so only 1 at this position in 2025. This feels like much like 2024, where they could probably sign 3 or 4.
Yeah, I that's kind of the sense I'm getting too. And with the names they're in on, it could be another really big cycle for that position.
There weren't any on campus except for Kendra Harrison, but tight end feels like another position. Jared was here, he would be yes, tight end, because he talks about it every time from a recruiting standpoint, and he's right. Like, but this one feels like another one where 2 feels ideal, and depending on the numbers and who they are, I could probably even get away with saying 3. That seems like a stretch, but look at the names that are kind of priority players. Look at the guys that they've offered, and then you can't kind of turn them away. Like, and we should also know 2027 linebacker or tight end Mark Bowman has reclassified to the 2026 class, and he has assumed the number 1 spot in the country at the tight end spot. Like that, it's pretty rare to see a guy reclass and still hold on to the top spot. Jakeem Stewart reclassed and dropped like 60 spots in the rankings.
A huge amount, by the way. That was interesting.
Yes. And signed with USC. Mark Bowman hasn't committed to anybody. He's bumped his eligibility up 1 year, and yet he still stays as the top player at the linebacker position. I mean, I have a hard time saying no to Mark Bowman. Have a hard time saying no to Eden Premer. Have a hard time saying no to Brock Harris. Have a hard time saying no to Israel Briggs. And if 2 of those guys want to come to Oregon with Kendra Harrison, like, it's hard to say no to that.
Yeah, I know Brock Harris is a name that they've been, I mean, kind of in the inner circle for a while, right, Matt? And
yes,
Briggs
and he has family from Oregon, so like there's a lot of ties here.
And Briggs didn't make it out. Is that right? I know that was a guy that was initially on the list.
Correct. He did not.
So they didn't host any other tight ends, but you can look at the top 5 or 6 tight ends in the country in this class and say it's kind of similar to last year, where Oregon's just kind of in the picture for all the top ones. And of course, last year, I don't want to say Vander Plug's not a great addition, but they were in on a kind of a different class or tier of tight ends for most of the cycle. Obviously, one committed and then flipped to Tennessee, and Lincoln Cure looked like for a moment it might happen. And God, who's the tight end that ended up at Penn State? There's just a lot of tight end movement.
Olesh.
Oh, Andrew Olesh. There you go. There's a lot of tight end movement. They were in on a lot of the names, but ultimately they kind of didn't. Because I'm not disappointed by Plug as a player, because I think he's going to be impactful, but the names were just different. It's possible in 2026 we come away going like, wow, that was a really impressive signing. And I know that the 2021 Ferg and Mataval kind of pairing has been probably the best tight end recruiting tandem they've signed ever at Oregon in one cycle. It's possible with the names they're in on for this cycle that, yeah, you could see them pretty easily, sign 2 of the top 5 or 6 guys.
I'd be curious to see along the offensive line, especially really at every spot. And I think this is an ideal position for Oregon. You look at, they've already got Cody Green committed. It's only 1 guy along the position group. But the names that they're involved with are big hitters. And this is where the big swings could come for Oregon with team rankings. Jackson Cantwell is the number 1 player at the position. He's a top 3 player nationally. He didn't get to Eugene, but he is by far one of their top targets. Emmanuel Inacho from Maryland is the number 2 player at the position, a top 5 player at tackle. He is also He was here for SNL,
He was
correct?
here. Yeah, we have a lot of photos. He was here at SNL. Yep.
And this is another guy they are heavily involved with. Uh, you look at the number 3 player and the number 4 player at the positions. Oregon is involved in there as well. Tommy Tofi, who was here in Eugene for a visit, I think that's a pretty big sign.
Mm-hmm.
From Northern California, he's a top 10 player at the position. Kelvin Obot is another player from Idaho that Oregon's heavily involved with. He's the 11th best player in the position. He's a top 150 prospect. I mean, we just named Sam Utu from Orange Lutheran in Southern California. Also is the 5th best offensive tackle, and he's got an Oregon offer they're involved with. So you look at the tackle positions and you tell yourself they're in a really good place here. And from a high ranking standpoint, from a prospect wise, you go down the list at tackle, and Grant Weiss from Florida, a 3-star guy. Center, probably interior lineman more instead of a tackle. But he's another one that I would throw in with Jax Tanner. Like, don't be surprised if this is a guy that is in the commit list down the road. We should note Lanning and Alik Terry were at Florida earlier this week. They saw Grant Weiss. That to me is a pretty big statement. Like, you want to go across the country and see all the guys that just came to Eugene, but they're finding ways to see other guys too that maybe couldn't make it. He tried. What happens at guard is going to be interesting. And I think some of the tackles probably translate more towards guard at the next level, but this is where things aren't as clear from a likely standpoint of who could commit. And it's going to be interesting to see where things shake out with Jack. I think Jax Tanner's probably going to be a Duck. We'll see right now. I think Grant Weiss could probably fall in line as an interior offensive lineman as well, even though he's ranked as a tackle. But where things fall here should be interesting. And Eric, call me crazy. The talent's loaded, especially out west, where I kind of think you want to get as many as you can.
And I think Tommy Tofi, who I spoke with, it felt like he had a really good visit. He's kind of a tackle, could be a guard. He drawn a comparison from Greg Biggins, at least, to Penei Sewell, which is, you take that every day. And just in terms of, I think, the size and athleticism. So that's definitely a guy who's I'm kind of intrigued by now, and we'll be curious to see what his rankings look like. But yeah, in terms of just the caliber of player you hope they sign here, I think it's interesting with Coach Terry that he's been here 2 years. They've been incredibly productive on the field. And I know there's been disappointing games, and maybe especially the most recent one where the O-line play wasn't great. But collectively, this has been 2 years he's been here. They've been Joe Moore Award finalists both year, and still you kind of read about what the perception is, and it's like, okay, he's done a good job developing and maybe getting the most out of the guys in the field, but he's not recruiting at a high enough level. And I don't think they've done a bad job at that point, but Cody Green would be far and away the highest rated player that he really recruited, because we remember Josh Connerly was more highly rated, but that was more of an Adrian Clem recruitment. So, I will be curious on, kind of how this shakes out, and how he kind of does he quiet that narrative because they go out and they sign 3 or 4 guys that are, top 100 offensive line recruits. Does that still carry over? To me, I don't think they've recruited O-line poorly. You just look at this most recent recruiting class where Addison, Utu, and Alai Kalaniavalu, by the end of the 2024-7 rankings, which, by the way, were just updated a couple of days ago, those are all top 140 recruits in the country. Like, those are good players to get. The question is, can you move in there and get some of those top 40 players in the country? And I think that's kind of the question, because as you said, Matt, the list of guys that they're in on are all in that spot. And you just kind of think, they've already got Cody Green. Can they get a couple more to solidify that?
Quarterback, did you find it interesting that Jonas Williams didn't make it out?
Yeah, it was interesting.
That was a little weird.
Yeah, usually you see the committed quarterback want to be one of the primary guys at the thing. Like, I know Achilles Smith Jr. was at last year's thing. There was photos of him with like DeCorian Moore and all these guys last year at these junior days.
So that was interesting. Oregon's lone commit in the class wasn't there, and we don't know. Like, look, we weren't able to talk with him before the visit weekend, and So we don't know the
And
reason.
geography is different for Keeley,
Yeah.
who's down in San Diego. This guy's out in like Chicago.
Correct. And maybe he's part of the high school basketball team and he's got a game that he can't miss to get out here. And the geography factor really hurts there. So we're not trying to cause negative there, but it's just interesting that he wasn't here. And then there were a bunch of underclassmen at this position on campus. There weren't any 2026 guys. And I'm curious of just how this is going to shake out because Ryder Lyons, the number 2 player at the position, he's a top 10 player. He's ranked 6th nationally. Jared Curtis is the 3rd best quarterback in the country, the 7th best player nationally. They're also very high on Oregon. There's a real good chance that both Lyons and Curtis could be in play. And we should note Lyons is going to take a religious mission very similar to what Gatlin Bear did a couple years ago when he signed with Oregon. So Lyons won't be at Oregon in 2026. But is there a possibility that Oregon could get all 3? Should they take 2? I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know if maybe Oregon definitively knows who that is, what that answer is. And it probably could depend on who the players are. They're not going to take just guys to take, but feels like next year can be an inflection point where we see some movement at the position group, whether it's exits or departures for the NFL draft.
Well, and then the other part of that's interesting, Matt, is how okay is Jonas Williams with them taking another quarterback, right?
True.
Because, Akili was seemingly okay with it. He and we'll just call him JKS now that I don't have to. I will say it's been nice thinking I don't have to perfect this name over the next 3 years.
Correct.
Even though I thought I had it with Jaron Chiave Sankapulotele. But Akili was seemingly fine with it. They both signed. They were both enrolled at one point together. Like, is Jonas Williams, does he have the same understanding? I mean, Akili, I just think mind was made up. I'm never going anywhere but Oregon. That's where my dad went. I grew up wanting to go to Oregon. I'm a diehard Duck fan. This is really important to me. Just Jonas Williams, who comes from Illinois, feel the same way about it. And if Oregon does make a push at Ryder Lyons or Jared Curtis, like, is he okay with signing off on, okay, I'll go in and be, and that's not to take anything. Again, we've said this a couple of times with these recruits. Like, Oregon has, commitments from guys that are really highly rated, top 189 player in Jonas Williams. It's just a different situation from a Ryder Lyons or Jared Curtis, who, as Matt said, are top 10 recruits nationally. So that would be kind of another question I would have, is if they do get deep with those guys, and it sounds like they are. Like, you read all the reports, it sounds like Oregon's very much in position to compete, right down to the wire for both Lyons and for Curtis. And if it ends up going that way, like, I'd be curious to see what happens with Jonas Williams. Does he open his recruitment back up and maybe take a look at some more of those other Big Ten teams?
And then defensively, this is where on the defensive side, I get back there. I know we talked about linebacker for a second here, but you look at the commit list. There's a lot of defensive linemen, edge type guys that are already in the fold. Bob Mulitalo, Tom Topi, Tony Cumberland, Villamy Moala, Dutch Horsick, all guys that are edge, defensive tackle, deep nose tackle type guys. But then you go down and you look at Oregon's offer list for those position groups. You look at edge, and you look at defensive line, and the guys that they're in on from a high ranking standpoint, there's a lot of guys still left on the board that they're heavily recruiting, that they're still active with. I mean, Zion Ely is a 5-star, the number 1 player at the position at edge, number 2 player in the country. He's committed to Maryland, but I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure how real that commitment will hold.
I think it'd be surprising if he signed with Maryland, given how much everybody else will want him.
Simote Katonanga from Sierra Catholic in, I believe, Northern California.
There's 2 of them, and I always give them back.
Juniper is the one in
SoCal. Sierra Juniper.
Sierra Junipero is in NorCal, but He's the sixth best edge player in the country. He's a guy that Oregon really likes. Derek Coleman-Brusa, he was in Eugene for this past weekend. He was an unexpected visitor. He's the best player in the state of Washington. He's a top 150 prospect. He actually messaged me last night that he's going to be taking one of his official visits in June to Oregon. We also look at another player. I'm going to butcher this name, and I really apologize. Famito Ciale out of O'Day High School, the third best player in the state of Washington. Another guy that's got an Oregon offer. I don't know how many they're going to take, but there's a lot of guys that are still like, hey, you better take this guy if he wants to commit. Still on the board, still showing heavy interest. Oregon still showing heavy interest. This could be a big group here.
Well, and again, like linebacker, Oregon took a huge number. Remember defensive line and linebacker were position groups that Oregon really hit hard in 2024 and then barely addressed in 2025. Like they took probably, I think, a combined 10 or 11 between like just front seven players in that 2024 cycle. And I think they took 4 in that 2025. And now it feels like in 2026, it's going to get back to, maybe it won't be 10 or 11, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's really close to that number. Like 7 to 9 feels like maybe almost underselling it, especially when you look at it and go right now, they've got 10 commits this cycle, and half of them, 5 of the 10 are front seven guys. 6 of the 10, is it 6? No, 5 of the 10 are so like it's going to be a position of focus. I think those front seven guys, and frankly, it should, because I don't want to be disparaging of what we saw throughout the course of the 2024 season, because I thought the defensive line was extremely disruptive. You think about some of those highlights, like against Washington. I think Bryce Betcher's awesome. I thought Jeff Boss had a great final season too. But these are positions that you need to be really, really good at to win at the highest of levels. And these are positions Dan has himself historically recruited really well at Georgia. So when they brought him in, the thought was he would ace these positions. I think so far it's been really, really strong. It needs to continue to be strong, and then they need to see those players transition on the field. And I think that's a big story of 2025, is how many of these young D linemen and linebackers are able to contribute. And then, of course, if they're going to continue to sign guys like this in 26, is how many of those guys can be contributors down the line too.
In the secondary, this is where it gets interesting. I don't have a good feel for excuse me, where they 100% stand from like a likelihood of a commitment. Blaine Bradford, a top 5 safety, a top 60 guy in the country. He was in Eugene. Jaire Edwards, he's the number 3 safety in the country out of Maryland. He was here Saturday Night Live, I believe.
Yep.
He's high on Oregon as well. The Ducks are in a good position there. Where does a guy like Brandon Arrington, who's going to be a 5-star, he's a number 2 athlete, a top 25 player nationally. He was in Eugene. He's 6'2". He could play receiver. He could play corner. He could play safety.
Yep.
I think Oregon's in a really good spot here. Maybe that's probably the most likely scenario. Jet Washington is listed as an athlete, probably more of a receiver. He wasn't here in Eugene, but he's another 5-star guy. Like the 2026 class is pretty loaded out west. And it feels like if Oregon's going to go out of the traditional footprint that Oregon has recruited, they recruit nationally now. But if they're going to go outside that regionalized footprint of Oregon, Washington, Nevada, California, Arizona, Utah, if they're going to go leave that area for another player, it really feels like that dude's probably someone special, because there's a lot of guys up and down the West Coast that are high on Oregon and are pretty talented.
And I was just thinking about this. We're kind of going through all these position groups, and it's pretty obvious the potential for a really balanced class, where like every position you've got somebody who's either a high 4-star, maybe a 5-star, and some depth at some of these spots. And we're talking about defensive line. Like I wouldn't be surprised if we come away going like, man, they signed like 7 or 8 blue chip, defensive line linebackers. The position that I'm actually curious here about, Matt, and there were some of these players in Eugene, I know you spoke to one of them most recently, is receiver, where Oregon has absolutely obliterated receiver recruiting. the last couple cycles. I know Johnny Wilson, or sorry, not Johnny Wilson. That's a further back decommitment. But I know that who was the 5-star who flipped to Florida. I'm just blanking on his name. I apologize.
Dallas Wilson.
Dallas Wilson. I knew it was a Wilson. I know he didn't sign, but you go, when he ended up at Florida after, I guess, signing. But you go through it and you go, God, they got Gatlin Bear back in 2024. They got DeCorion and all of these guys. Like, they've had a 5-star basically at the position the last 2 cycles. They hosted a couple of big names here over the weekend. I'm curious to see where that goes. And I say that because currently they've got players committed at kind of almost every position on the team, with the exception of defensive back and wide receiver. And receiver's just been a position they've done so well at with Junior Adams. I'm just curious to see where this goes. And obviously having the number 1 player here, I think Chris Henry was actually, he's now demoted to the number 2 in the 24/7 rankings, I think. But that was big. Matt, what's your kind of thinking at receiver? It's just interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they had Henry here. He's you got to go after him. He's currently committed to Ohio State, but he was here for Saturday Night Live. I think he was here for the Ohio State game, the first one. I think he was also here earlier last year as well for an unofficial visit, like during the offseason before 2024. So this is his 4th or 5th time now in Eugene. And that tells me that there's a door open. And maybe it's going to be like Aneem offered from the 2025 class that stays committed to Ohio State for the longest time and then flips at the last minute to Oregon. Maybe he opens up and commits to Oregon earlier. Maybe it doesn't happen. But and look, like, are you going to fault any highly regarded receiver to land at Ohio State right now? Like, I know Oregon's they're starting to develop now the reputation of having good receivers. Dylan Mitchell in 2018, and then Troy Franklin when he showed up in 2021, 2022, 2023. Now Tez Johnson 2 years in a row from 2023 and 2024. Evan Stewart's probably going to be the next one in line to go from 24 and 25, and we'll see what the younger guys can do. But I don't think there's really any fault if Chris Henry sticks with Ohio State. You'd love to have him. You'd love to get that guy because he is huge. He's 6'5". He's just another type of guy that just Oregon doesn't have a ton of it. That a bunch of schools don't have. He's the top guy. If you can flip him, it really doesn't matter after that, in my opinion. He's that good. But Caden Dixon-Wyatt, he was another guy that was on campus, a 4-star guy. Same high school as Chris Henry. Imagine that. Like,
I was just thinking the same thing, Matt. Like, lining up on a Friday and going, yeah, we got 2 of the 5 best receiver recruits this class out here, and they're both going to be probably NFL guys in 5 years.
Pretty special there from a high school perspective. He's another guy you probably look at and say, good to decent chance that Oregon is in a strong position for. But then after that, at receiver, you can go across the board and across, whether it's the West Coast or you can leave, outside the region and find options. Mentioned Arrington, where he fits. Maybe it's receiver. I don't know. Braden Robinson's a Tez Johnson type guy. Like, he's like 5'9", 160 pounds from Texas. He's going to be taking an unofficial visit to Oregon later this spring. Oregon's recruiting Sinai Thomas from same high school as Tommy Tofi, an offensive lineman. They're involved there. What happens with what is his name? I'm forgetting it. He's the athlete out of Bishop Gorman High School, Jet Washington. Mm-hmm. He's another like Chris Henry type guy, 6'5", 200 pounds, 5-star. Probably more of a receiver, could maybe play safety, but they've got a lot of options. And I'll be curious to see the number that they take, because that will likely lead to telling us how many guys are exiting the program potentially after 2025.
Yeah, and then you think about what that 2026 receiving core could be if they actually were to get somebody like a Chris Henry, where they would have had, I think, 4 consecutive classes with the 5-star receiver, because Gatlin Bear would be enrolling.
Yep.
We'll see what happens with Jurian Dickey, but a theoretical Decorian Moore, Chris Henry, Gatlin Bear group could be something something Oregon fans have never seen from the receiver position before. So I think Henry's recruitment is going to be fascinating to watch throughout this. It really feels like if he doesn't go to Ohio State, he's going to Oregon in a strange way. Like, it just kind of feels like those are the two schools. And while Ohio State is really going to be, as Matt said, hard to beat for a receiver recruit, and all you have to do if you're Chris Henry is go watch the Rose Bowl, which I'm sure he did, as he doesn't live too far from Pasadena, to see what a receiver for Ohio State is capable of doing. But that's a guy that if you're Oregon, you got to kind of throw the kitchen sink at, if you ask me, because I think at that position, he's really the guy right now for them.
100%. We'll have more coverage from a recruiting standpoint on duckterritory.com in the coming days, weeks, as we continue to follow that's 2026, 2027 recruiting efforts. Signing day for remaining 2025 players is just a couple days away. That will be held, I believe, on the 1st of February, which is going to be in a couple days. We'll see what happens there. And then not the 1st, the 5th, excuse me. I was looking at the top of January, not February. I don't anticipate, Eric, any 2025 guys, like high school JUCO guys. This will probably be Dan coming forth and giving us information on Thieneman, on Jabari Johnson, the tight end that they signed, Bear Alexander that they signed, like the portal guys. This will probably be a portal signing only.
Yeah, or I don't think Kalani Avalu was committed.
Correct.
Because he came a day later, I think, maybe, or a couple days. I wonder if that'll be a name to ask him about. So, yeah, it's been interesting, Matt, in 25, because usually there's, I don't know, 3 or 4 names that we're kind of talking about this time of year, going like, well, maybe or maybe not, and they end up signing 1 or 2. I mean, Bear was obviously notably a huge one last February. I don't think that feels like where we're headed, though, either. There just isn't really any buzz. I think if there were guys that they were really, really in on, we would know about it. And I haven't seen anybody like even include Oregon in a decision they're making on Wednesday next week. So I'm with you.
I mean, looking at just the 2025 player rankings right now, the highest rated uncommitted, unsigned prospect is Ty Haywood, 42nd in the country. And then you go to the next closest guy, and I'm sitting here scrolling.
Yeah,
I'm now in the hundreds, and they've all signed. This is great radio, podcasting, but like the next closest guy is Zaire Mathis, 166. Like 2 guys in the top 170, 200, now in the 200 range. So like there's just not a lot of guys. Like the February signing day used to be the only signing day. It used to be those are the only 2 guys in the top 247 that are unsigned right now. It used to be the day that all this stuff happened, and it's no longer the case. Basically, everyone's done by December, and it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest that either they push back to February or they just eliminate February entirely, and it's just not a thing in a couple of years. Just because everyone signed early, and there's no need for the second one.
And I really hope, for Oregon's sake, I just wrote about this. I did a little 24/7 national hit. I hope they don't sign if they're going to sign someone, don't sign a 3-star to ruin my stat, which is the 100% blue trip 25 recruiting class, which is only the second in 24/7 sports history where they signed only 4 and 5-star recruits, which sounds really cool to say. I'd love to be able to keep saying that. And if they went out and signed some little old 3-star, Matt, it would ruin that for us. So come on, Dan, let's keep this narrative going.
All right, it's going to do it for us here on the Odds and Audibles podcast. Until the next one, thank you for listening. You've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.